It is always advisable and highly recommended that we use some kind of caption here to indicate what this diagram is trying to display. So let's say that this is BMS system, and this is a visitor class finite state machine. Okay, and you can specify who is the author, right? And you can specify it right here, and you can specify what is the date and revisions and all of this. But it's important to have some kind of indication here on the diagram. What is this diagram is trying to show us? So that's an example of the state diagram, but of course I would suggest, strongly suggest, that the actual documentation that accompanies the state diagram is the primary description of the state machine. So when do we use state diagrams? So they're pretty good describing the behavior of an object. You see, those events that we use the state transition indicate and tell us a lot about interaction between the rest of the system and a specific visitor. So of course the behavior of the visitor is reflective of the rest of the system or interaction with the rest of the system. So that's a possibility, of course, that this object may survive a particular use case. In the case of the scenario, we can have the user play the scenario, and all of these transitions start happening, and the visitor starts visiting floors and basically accomplishing all the tasks that the visitor has in its agenda. But at the same time, the user could click the pause button. And in the middle of this pause button, what could happen is that, for instance, the user would want to display statistics about this simulation. So it may find out how many visitors are present in the building. They could learn more about the statistics of individual elevators and even look at the agendas of individual visitors. So there could be other use cases involved where this very visitor that we're trying to show in this diagram may be also involved. However, then the user may decide to basically unpause and continue to play the simulation. So then again, this visitor will just continue with this process of getting notified about updates in the system and transition itself accordingly. Now also, I'd like to make a note here that you should never interpret this diagram as interaction between multiple objects. Remember, state machine is a description of the behavior of a specific object, of a specific kind, specific class of object. So basically, it's the same object that basically has its own state right here and transitions to a different state and then transition to a different state. It's the same object. It's always the same object. Is nothing new. No new objects are created. It's basically each bubble is just a formal recognition of the state in which this object right here currently is. So of course, in different states, as we move from state to state, it's very possible that all of these data attributes will kept getting updated. And so that's really just in the life cycle of an object, we show the possibilities of it reacting to certain events and moving to new states. So in general, state diagrams could be used for a combination of objects, but it can be kind of confusing because it just complicates exponentially the set of states that multiple objects can contribute to that kind of collaboration. So in case of interacting objects, remember we prefer to use sequence diagrams that visualize objects interacting with each other and also the rest of the system interacting with the combination of these objects. It's also not that everybody finds this these types of diagrams natural. So remember that we need to use the mix of techniques that work for every audience. So maybe you want to be able to interact with programmers and designers and technical documentation people and also expert users and some stakeholders, investors. There could be so many different audiences, so this is a little bit more technical, I guess, and it works very well for in benefit of designing and implementing successful objects, but not necessarily would be natural to anybody, or to everyone that you may have to share your design ideas with. And also, you don't have to draw state diagrams for every class in the system. Okay, so consider, for instance, an object that is like a mailing address. So we have this object which pretty much is just a capture of like street number, town, zip code, country, and all of this bunch of information typically coming with an address. So it's just has some kind of initial state. It gets populated with information, and there's no interesting transitions there. Okay, so we rarely make updates here. Basically, if we need a different address, we just trash this object and we can reproduce it, brand new version with the corrected information or something like that. So it's only really just for objects with some interesting behavior, like we discussed here our visitor, and we also discussed an elevator class that describes a physical appliance, physical machinery. It is also possible to use user interface description using the state diagram. If you think about it, and I'll just try to save my diagram here and just create a brand new diagram and also go to an example of the state diagram. So it's possible that I can use the states or state diagram notation to display, to visualize user screens. So I could use this bubble to demonstrate a login screen, right? Login with username and password right here. Okay, so I could show entries like this in this and make it look like a form of some sort. And then I can go to another screen in this in the environment of the state diagram, and here I could show that this is the main menu, right, in the system, and I can specify number 1, right, and I can show the user this menu with all sorts of choices they can have and so forth, like this. And then I can have other bubbles showing other screens in the system. And so with an idea of a state diagram, I can show that the user could transition from one screen to another, or from one web page to another if this is web application, like this. And so for instance, if they make a mistake entering username and password, I can tell them that their login credentials were incorrect, and in that case, of course, we would be transitioning right back here. Right, so the state machine diagrams are also very successful in describing user interface communication and ability of the user to jump from one screen to another, and with every button and every other navigation link and everything that's available in these screens, we can show which specific places the user can navigate in the system. Just keep it in mind that usually having this type of diagram, the state diagram, to describe the state of the user interface in front of the user is a very good idea, and it's very easy to follow, and it's very helpful in the system, in the design of the user interface of the system.